There is a quiet kind of distance that doesn't come from rejection, but from perception. Some people move through society feeling slightly out of sync, as if the world's rhythm was learned intellectually rather than felt instinctively. They can participate, respond, even succeed, yet something inside remains a step behind, observing instead of merging. This disconnection is rarely dramatic. It shows up in small moments, in conversations that feel rehearsed, in laughter that arrives a second too late, in the subtle sense of being present without fully belonging. Often, these individuals are not lacking social ability. They are carrying a deeper awareness, one that notices tone, contradiction, and emotional undercurrents others pass over quickly. And that awareness, while quietly powerful, can slowly create a sense of standing apart from the collective flow of society. The subtle sense of not belonging in everyday interactions. For some people, disconnection begins in the smallest social moments, long before it becomes a conscious thought. It appears in casual conversations where responses come out correct but feel internally delayed, as if the mind is translating rather than speaking. There is often an unspoken awareness of posture, tone, timing, and implication happening all at once, creating a quiet split between participation and observation. While others seem to move through interactions effortlessly, these individuals remain subtly alert, tracking what is said and what is avoided. This is not shyness, and it is not fear. It is a heightened sensitivity that notices micro shifts in energy, pauses that last a fraction too long, smiles that do not reach intention. The body stays present, yet the nervous system remains slightly outside the exchange, evaluating rather than dissolving into it. Over time, this repeated pattern can create a low-grade sense of social unreality, where connection feels technically possible, but emotionally filtered. The person is not rejecting society, nor being rejected by it. They are simply experiencing it through an extra internal layer, one that makes belonging feel conditional, momentary, and strangely fragile. When social norms feel learned rather than lived. For others, the sense of disconnection forms not because society is hostile, but because it feels procedural. Social norms are understood, even mastered, yet they remain external, like a language learned fluently but never dreamed in. These individuals often know when to speak, when to pause, when to smile, but the knowledge comes from observation rather than instinct. The body follows rules the mind has memorized, while something deeper stays quiet, watching the performance unfold. This can create a subtle tension, where social life feels less like participation and more like navigation. There is no resentment in this, only a mild distance, as if authenticity must be translated before it can be expressed. Over time, repeated reliance on learned behavior can make interactions feel thin, not because they lack meaning, but because meaning arrives filtered through effort. The person begins to sense that others are living inside the rules, while they are standing just outside them, competent, polite, and faintly unseen. Heightened inner awareness and the cost of constant self-monitoring. For some, disconnection grows from an inner awareness that never fully turns off. Thoughts, emotions, and reactions are observed almost as they occur, creating a continuous loop of noticing oneself noticing. In social spaces, this can feel like standing slightly behind your own actions, monitoring tone, intention, and impact in real time. While others lose themselves in the flow of interaction, these individuals remain partially anchored inside, tracking their internal state alongside the external moment. This awareness is often mistaken for overthinking, but it is closer to a finely tuned internal radar. The cost appears quietly. When attention is split inward and outward, immersion becomes difficult. Laughter is genuine, yet partially witnessed. Connection is felt, yet simultaneously evaluated. Over time, this constant self-monitoring can thin the emotional texture of social life, not because depth is missing, but because depth is happening internally, away from shared space. The person does not feel empty, they feel full, but alone with what they carry. Emotional depth in a world optimized for speed. Some people feel disconnected not because they lack feeling, but because they feel too much for the pace they are asked to live in. Their emotional responses move slowly, layering meaning rather than skimming it, while the world around them favors quick reactions and clean conclusions. In conversations, they may sense multiple emotional threads at once, some of which cannot be addressed without slowing the moment down. This creates a quiet mismatch. While others move on, they are still processing what was implied, what shifted, what remained unsaid. Emotional depth takes time to settle, and when there is no space for that settling, it can feel like carrying weight without a place to set it down. The result is not overwhelm, but distance, a sense that society is moving past experiences before they have fully arrived inside. Connection becomes possible, but brief, because depth cannot rush without losing itself. The quiet fatigue of adapting to collective expectations. Over time, disconnection can emerge from something less visible than conflict: exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but the slow drain that comes from continuous adaptation. Some people learn early how to adjust their tone, pace, and presence to fit what a situation seems to require. They become skilled at meeting expectations that are never spoken aloud. Each adjustment is small, almost unnoticeable, yet together they create a persistent background effort. Social life begins to feel like a series of calibrations rather than expressions. The fatigue does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates quietly, showing up as a desire to withdraw, not from people, but from the constant need to align. When adaptation becomes habitual, authenticity is not lost, but delayed, always waiting for a space where it does not need translation. In that waiting, distance forms, not as rebellion, but as self-preservation. Disconnection as a protective form of psychological distance. For some, disconnection is not something that happens to them, but something that quietly forms in response to experience. After repeated moments of being misunderstood, overlooked, or emotionally overexposed, the mind learns to create a small but intentional distance. Not enough to isolate, just enough to stay intact. This distance acts less like a wall and more like a filter, allowing interaction without full emotional exposure. From the outside, it can look like detachment or indifference. Internally, it feels closer to regulation, a way of maintaining coherence in environments that demand more than they offer back. Over time, this protective distance can become familiar, even comforting. The person still cares, still notices, still feels deeply, but chooses where to place that depth. Society is not rejected. It is held at a careful range where engagement is possible without erosion. How inner coherence can matter more than social integration. At a certain point, some people realize that what they have been seeking in society is not inclusion, but alignment. The feeling of being disconnected softens when inner life becomes more coherent than external validation. Instead of trying to fit smoothly into every context, attention shifts inward toward maintaining psychological consistency. This does not remove loneliness, but it reframes it. The question becomes less about where one belongs and more about what feels internally true. Social integration, when it happens, is no longer forced. It becomes selective, quieter, shaped around resonance rather than visibility. From the outside, this can look like withdrawal. Internally, it feels like stabilization. The person is not stepping away from society out of fear, but choosing not to fragment themselves for the sake of seamless participation. In this state, distance is no longer a problem to solve. It is simply the space required for inner coherence to exist. Feeling disconnected from society is often framed as a flaw, a sign that something needs to be fixed or overcome. Yet, for many, it is neither failure nor avoidance, but information, a signal about pace, depth, and internal truth. Disconnection does not always mean the absence of connection. Sometimes it reflects a refusal to participate in ways that require self-fragmentation. When seen this way, distance becomes less about separation and more about discernment. The challenge is not to force belonging, but to understand what kind of presence is sustainable. In that understanding, a quieter form of relationship with society can emerge, one that does not demand constant alignment, only enough honesty to remain whole.